Greetings and welcome to Exploring OpenIZ. This is a web series that's going to explore some of the more technical aspects of the OpenIZ platform, and in this video we're going to talk about getting started with the OpenIZ SDK. Today we're going to focus on is what is the SDK, first of all, and why would we even have an SDK for a product. And then we're going to get into downloading and getting our computer ready for development with OpenIZ. Finally, we're going to mess around with some code and do a little bit of a Hello World program. And I'll show you how to actually get started with an OpenIZ applet. So what is the SDK? Well, the SDK is, of course, a software development kit. And OpenIZ itself is just a platform. So when you install OpenIZ and the OpenIZ server, you're not going to really get anything useful. There'll be no user screens, there'll be no fancy buttons or anything, anywhere to click. It really doesn't do anything useful out of the box. And to do useful things, we need to customize it with something called an applet. And what is an applet? An applet itself is a term we use for a plugin which contains user interface screens, custom business rules, clinical protocols, and of course, reports. And there's more information in the OpenIZ architecture presentation available online. Now, in order to download and get ready for this installation, we have to have one of three configurations. The platform will run on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS X. However, if you're going to run it on Windows, you're going to need a code editor like Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio Community, and a Git client in addition to the Microsoft.NET framework. In this video, we're going to use Visual Studio Code because it's a nice lightweight editor that allows us to quickly demonstrate some of the features. If you're going to run it on Linux or on Mac OS X, it's a different download. There are Ubuntu Debian packages available. You are going to need Xamarin 5 and an HTML code editor as well as a Git client. And that's the same with Mac OS X. So without further ado, let's dive into the OpenIZ SDK. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do with OpenIZ SDK is you need to download it and install it onto your computer. Now, I'm going to assume that you already have installed on your computer Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio Community or an HTML editor. So I'm not going to show that. I'm just going to show the process of where to find the SDK. So on the OpenIZ homepage, we're going to click on Technology, and that's going to take us to the pillar technologies of OpenIZ. And in the middle here, you're going to see something called a disconnected client. The disconnected client is the default user interface framework for writing mobile applications, Windows applications, and Linux applications with OpenIZ. And I'm going to download the latest version. If you click on the link down here, the download link, it's going to take you to just the generic downloads page. And you can grab the most up-to-date version of the software. So the download that I'm interested in is the OpenIZ DC SDK. And I'm going to grab the Fredericton Beta 2. There'll probably be newer versions by the time you're watching this video, so just feel free to download the most up-to-date version. If you're running Mac OS X, there's a tarball there, and there's usually a Debian package for Ubuntu systems. And I'm just going to log in here to my account so I can install this. And you're going to be presented in Windows, at least, with an installer for the SDK. Of course, it's licensed under the Apache 2 license agreement, and I'm just going to go ahead and install the SDK. And when the installation is finished, you're not going to get any special screens or anything. It's actually just installed the SDK. But if I click on my Start menu, and I scroll down to OpenIZ here, or OpenIZ, you're going to see that it's created several new programs for me. And the one we're going to explore first in today's video is something called the OpenIZ SDK command prompt. Now when I launch the SDK command prompt, it's going to tell me about some of the development tools that are available for OpenIZ. And today we're going to be using something called the Mini Immunization Management Server, or a Mini MS, or Mini IMS. And I can verify my installation just by typing in minims-help, and it's going to tell me the current version of what's installed. Now I can't remember if I've already run this on my computer, so I'm going to reset the environment. And every time you're writing code with OpenIZ SDK and you want to test a fresh install, you can just run min-ims-reset. Now, the next thing I need to do is I need to actually start my applet project. And you can actually start an applet project from scratch. We do, however, provide a template for this particular applet paradigm. And if I go back to the OpenImmunize homepage at openiz.org, you're going to notice this column here that says extending the platform. And there's a link here to get started. What this link is it is a template for an applet that you can use to quickly get started writing OpenIZ plugins. I'm going to actually clone this into a project directory. So I'm going to run, and I'm currently in a guest account, so I'm going into my documents, and I'm going to git clone OpenIZ DCTPL, and I'm going to clone it into a project called demo. And now I have cloned into demo here a copy of this particular applet. Now using my code editor, and I have Visual Studio Code running here, I'm going to actually open up this project. So I'm going to open up a folder, and I'm going to go to my documents, demo, and you're going to see here there's a certain structure to a OpenIZ applet. And I'm not going to focus on the structure here. There's a link in the description for this video to detailed description of what each of these files are. But today we're just going to mess around with some of the API components. So going back to my SDK command prompt, I want to launch the debugging environment. And I can do that by typing in min-ims. And I want to reference the core pack files. And these are applets that come from the OpenIZ community. And there are two of them. There's the org OpenIZ core.pack file, which contains the login screens, the user preferences screens, the debugging screens, the configuration screens. And then there's the org.openiz.templates pack file, which are the clinical templates. The next thing I want to do is I want to reference the applet that I'm developing. So to do that, I type in --applet, and I provide a path to my application that I'm trying to debug. I'm going to run this, and the very first thing I need to do is I need to configure the OpenIZ instance. Now, OpenIZ, again, is a platform, and by default, the client doesn't have a server to talk to. And because I'm going to be debugging my user screens on the client, I need to actually have a server to talk to. And I'm just going to use the default server of demo.openiz.org. And I'm going to provide a guest administrator account that you can use to join this particular realm in the comments. This server gets wiped every week, so it's quite safe to join and experiment with. But I'm just going to use the master administrator password for this particular video. We're going to get a application is joined to the realm notification, which basically means that my computer is now able to access that server. And I'm going to join a particular facility. And in the case of demo.openiz.org, that facility is called Good Health Hospital. And there's a couple of other settings that we can play with. I don't really like highly verbose logs, so I'm going to turn that down to just warnings and errors. And I can also, if I require a proxy, go through a proxy to access this server. And I'm going to confirm this particular configuration, and I'm going to get a notification that I need to restart the service. If I'm using the mobile or Windows or Linux client at this particular time, it would normally restart itself. The mini IMS does not do that. So I'm just going to let it close, and I'm going to stop the server by pressing Enter. And I'm going to relaunch the OpenIZ mini IMS, and now I'm presented with this login screen. And you might ask, why is there a login screen? And to answer that, we need to go back to the source code. What's happened is the mini IMS has actually launched my application. And if I look at my index.html and I zoom in here, I can remember how to zoom in on Visual Studio Code. Basically what we're looking at here is the OpenIZ demand flag. And what this demand flag is asking for is for a particular user, maybe I can, zoom in. For a particular session, this particular page requires you to be logged in. And that OID or object ID is defined on the OpenIZ documentation. And what's happened here is I've been prompted with a login screen. So I'm going to log in using the default credentials. And again, these are in the link below. And I'm going to be presented with my sample applet. Now, where does the my sample applet text come from? Well, it's nowhere, actually it's right here in the index file. So the way that I develop my application is I can say Justin Demo on the end of the title. And if I refresh this, you're going to see that we get live updates. And this environment is very helpful for when you're developing or debugging and you want quick refresh cycles. Now you can use any of your favorite browser tools to debug. I can also use Chrome. If I just copy this link into Chrome and do the exact same process here and launch my debugger, you can see that I have full Chrome debugging, and I can actually diagnose issues with my code here. You're also going to notice that the mobile app has all these extra screens, and you're not going to be able to find the source code for these screens because these are core screens provided by org.openiz.core applet. And that's basically screens about debug information, synchronization center, etc. My application has put in a little kind of hacked icon here to show the particular search bar. And the functionality of this particular application is quite simple. It lets me search for a patient. So if I search for someone with my name, I'm going to get a very basic search results page. And if I type in, say, a lowercase name, you see it's not going to do anything, right? And that's a known bug with this particular app. I'd have to go in and correct that because it's not actually updating the search results when there are no results. So how would I diagnose this? How would I diagnose this? Well, if I come into the source code and I notice here that this particular script is referencing controllers index.js, and I look at my source tree here, I can see that there's an index.js file. And if you've ever used AngularJS, this should look quite familiar to you. This is the JavaScript controller for the AngularJS page. And I can see here that there's a function called OpenIZ.patient.findAsync. And what this is going to do is query by the name, has to have a component whose value matches what I type in to my search bar. And then I have a continue with, which is the action to take if it is, in fact, successful. And here I can see if I have items in my search results, I want to actually update the search results. So I'm going to actually just fix this bug here. I'm going to move the scope.apply below, and I'm going to do an else statement. And this else is going to handle the case where there is no item. So item is null. And if that's the case, my results should be empty, and my total results should be 0. And if I come back to my page in Chrome and refresh and try to reproduce the bug, so I'll search for some search results, and then I'll search for something that returns nothing. You'll see I've corrected that bug. And you can see how easy it is for me to actually correct defects in this particular built-in applet. But what about adding functionality? What if I want to add, say, let's pull up Justin again. What if I want to add, say, the patient's date of birth as another column? I would need to add the date of birth. So I can actually come into Chrome, and if I pull up the index.js file, set a breakpoint when I return my results here. And I can hit search, and I can actually inspect the data that comes back. So I'm going to expand this, and you'll see there's quite a bit of information that's been added for this patient. Now, some of these might not make sense to you, and that's quite all right. There is actually documentation for this. So if I come back to the OpenIZ.org homepage, I'm just going to go to OpenIZ.org, and I look at the disconnected client GitHub page, you'll notice that there is, in fact, a wiki. And what's in the wiki is a getting started page for developers, which takes you through the contents of this particular video, but it also has something called the JavaScript reference. And if I were to look at the patient and the find async method, what I would see is that it's going to return a series of patients. And in here, I will actually get a full documentation of what each of the properties in patient means. So if I'm looking for date of birth, I can actually see here that a date of birth is in fact a date. So going back to the code, I want to actually return and show the patient's date of birth. Well, here I've already copied over the patients in my search result. So I'm going to go to my index.html to try and add the date of birth. But here you can see there's no actual place where the table's drawn. One of the things that OpenIZ applets do is they include something called a server-side include. And if you've ever seen this syntax, it'll be very familiar to you. Basically, what this does is what we call a static include. It takes the contents of the views/dashboard.html page and puts it into this section of the index.html. And it's a very good way to have common functionality broken up into partial HTML views. So if I expand views, I'm going to open up my dashboard, and here is where I have my patient search code. So I'm going to add the patient's date of birth. I'm going to add a table header here. And I'm going to add my Angular binding to patient.dateofbirth. And once again, inside of Chrome, if I search for Justin, let me just remove this breakpoint and actually close the debugger. Now you're going to see I have, in fact, a date of birth. Now that's formatted as a very ugly exact string. What I can do is I can actually format that. And I can format it using standard Angular filters. So here I'm going to do year, month, day. And I'm going to search again. And now I get my year, month, day. Now one of the things that OpenIZ does for us is it allows us to be very flexible with the data we capture. So if I go back to my documentation, one thing I'll notice is that there's a date of birth precision. There's also a deceased date precision. Now sometimes when we have clinical scenarios, a patient might not know their exact date of birth, or we might not know their exact date that they died, but we might know a month or we might know a year. That's what the date of birth precision and the deceased date precision fields will do. But how can I render that in a way that makes sense and it's not going to clutter my code up with a bunch of switch cases? Well, there's a whole bunch of built-in OpenIZ filters that allow you to easily accomplish this. You can see that there's an OIZ entity name filter, which is allowing me to render a complex name quite easily. There's also a date precision filter. And what I can do here is I can actually just pass in my date of birth precision field. And when I render this again, date precision format, sorry. Date precision format filter, the joys of doing live demos. You're going to see that I actually have full date precision format for these. So these people were actually born full date precision. And if they were born approximate date of precision, or if I only wanted to show to the month, I could actually just describe that by saying I only want it displayed to the month. And OpenIZ would take care of the rendering, however that was localized for the context that I'm working in. And that's the key here, is you don't know necessarily what context you're going to be running in when you're writing applets, so it's always good to use the built-in filters to let OpenIZ handle that kind of work. I can also display the patient's address. So if I wanted to put in the patient's address, it's quite simple. I can add another column. And here I'm going to do a patient.address dot patient.address.home address, and there's one called OIZ entity address. And once again, when I run this, it's going to render out that address for me. Again, quite easily, and I didn't have to add a lot of code. Now when I'm ready to actually package my application, the last step that I need to do after I'm done testing and I'm satisfied with the functionality is I need to actually package it and upload it to a server. Unfortunately, this video doesn't cover setting up a server, and you can't upload applets to the demo.OpenIZ server for security reasons. So what we're going to show you is the compilation process. So to compile, I'm just going to bring up my console here, and this particular console is set to the root directory of my demo, and you'll notice that there are two batch files in here, build debug and build release. Build debug will actually compile all my HTML and JavaScript into a single, what we call pack file, but it won't minify it. Build release will optimize the file, which makes it a lot harder to debug, but it makes the file a lot smaller. I'm going to run build debug. And what you're going to notice is the applet compiler is going to fire up from the SDK, and it's going to include a warning here that it's not signed, and that's because OpenIZ requires code signing. If I go to bin, so if I just open up the bin directory here, you're going to notice that there is a pack file installed or generated for this particular application. What I would do is I would log into an OpenIZ administration panel and I would upload this file to that particular administration panel, and that server now would distribute my pack file to all the connected clients on that particular network or in that particular realm. And that is it. You've just actually customized an OpenIZ application. You've written an applet that searches for patients. There are lots of other options that you can do and use OpenIZ APIs to customize the interface, as well as provide additional functionality. We'll cover that in more detail in future videos. Thank you for watching.